The American Airlines plane crash in Washington, D.C. 60 people and 4 crew were aboard the plane when it collided with the U.S. Army helicopter, which was carrying 3 soldiers, and crashed into the Potomac River. At least 19 bodies have been recovered from the Potomac, according to CBS News. Now, in a moment, we'll talk to Kevin Byrne, retired Lieutenant Colonel and airport safety and security expert. But first, a little earlier, officials gave a press briefing on the search and rescue operation. This is Washington, D.C. Fire and EMS Chief John Donnelly.
This evening at 8:48, an alert was sounded, initiating a large regional response to a report of an aircraft crash on approach to the airport. At 8:58, the first units arrived on the scene and found an aircraft in the water and began rescue operations. This incident has grown. There's currently about 300 responders working. We have boats from all throughout the region, police and fire boats. We're operating under a unified command. Everybody's together. So we also have requested state police helicopters from Maryland, and the Coast Guard helicopter is working. So this is a state and federal response as well. U.S. Coast Guard's got some boats in the water as well. So it's a highly complex operation. The conditions out there are extremely rough for the responders. It's cold. They're dealing with relatively windy conditions. Wind is hard out on the river. So they're out there working. We're doing everything we can to keep them safe.
And that's Washington, D.C. Fire Chief John Donnelly. Kevin Byrne, good morning.
Good morning, Pat.
Now, this is an extraordinary thing because very busy airports around Washington, D.C. There's Ronald Reagan Airport, there's Dulles Airport, lots of movement and yet relatively safe. So what happened here?
It's hard to know for sure, but it looks as if the American Airlines Aircraft was the 5342 flight, a routine flight coming in from Wichita in Kansas into Reagan National, which deals mostly with the domestic flights in and out of the States. The big one, Dulles, is up the road, basically about 40 miles away, and that's the one to which Aer Lingus flies. But it's very busy airspace. I've been there a few times. My son used to work there and live there, and I've been through the airport a few times. A very nice little place. It's on the west bank of the River Potomac, remarkably busy for a very tight schedule, and because of the what's the word I'd say, the security elements and the military all around Washington, there's a huge amount of traffic there, both fixed wing and helicopters. You've got the Army, Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, and you've also got the police services and Secret Service, and they're flying hither and thither, and they mix fairly well. Air traffic control provided the normal service to this flight coming into land. It was about 8:45 local time, dark and cold and windy, as the man has just said, and the helicopter was Pat 25. That's a Black Hawk helicopter out of Belvoir Army Base going on a training flight with 3 people, and it was going on a routine route across the airport. There are crisscrossing routes in the airspace around Washington. There are prohibited airspaces and restricted airspaces, so it's quite tight, quite controlled, and somehow a collision took place where somebody misidentified one or other of the aircraft, as far as we can tell.
We're going to listen to a little bit of ATC before the event, and what we're talking about here is the aircraft was heading for runway 1, which was normal, and then it was diverted to runway 33, which was just to alleviate congestion in the area. Quite a routine thing to happen. But let's have a listen to the interaction.
Tower 5342 on Mount Vernon Visual, runway 1.
Blue Sheet 5342, Washington Tower 1 star 32 Zurich 17, got 25. Can you take runway 33?
Yeah, we can do 33 for Blue Sheet 5342.
Blue Sheet 5342, that's a Wilson Bridge, thanks for runway 33, runway 33, clear for land.
Change to runway 33, runway 33 for land, Blue Sheet 5342.
So, Kevin, there we have it. They are diverting to runway 33. They acknowledge this is where we're going. Yes, we can do it, they say.
Yes, and the important element that is visual. We are visual with runway 10, so they're flying sideways, basically turning to runway 33. I understand that Pat 25 was also on the same frequency, so the pilot of the helicopter should be aware of the traffic around which he's supposed to fly, because he was told, I understand, to go behind the CRJ. That's the type of aircraft. It was a twin-engine, light, middle ground type of aircraft, a Bombardier CRJ, and the lights would have been on, collision beacons and that kind of thing. And the pilot of the Black Hawk was allegedly supposed to go behind that. That didn't happen, unfortunately. The helicopter was flying, I think, south, and the jet was going to fly north, because 33 is a northerly heading from that point of view.
Okay, so the helicopter pilot would hear of these exchanges with
Yes.
5342, and obviously something went badly wrong. Now, when the collision happened, we can hear some more of ATC. Now, before we listen to this, what are we looking out for?
Well, if there's a collision, you're going to see it. And in fact, the video is quite graphic. You know, there's a big explosion from that point of view. And because of the uncertainty and the loss of the air traffic control communications, in other words, you've lost the American Airlines flight and you've lost the Black Hawk, you have to then, figure a crash. A crash has happened, it's been reported. So the airport has to close, basically, because immediate rescue operations must take place. So diversions will take place of those aircraft on final approach, and they'll stop aircraft taking off, which is quite a busy time of the evening. So there's going to be a lot of, an emergency phase goes into action.
And what is remarkable, I mean, these pilots who are talking to ATC have seen something terrible happen in midair, and yet, the typical calm pilot, many of them Air Force trained, of course, who become commercial pilots. But let's just have a listen to the aftermath.
American 4782, my bad now for individual.
American 472, Washington, 1 star, 32017.
Did you see that?
American 472. American 3130, go around, turn left end, 250, climb maintain 3000.
And extraordinary exchanges, pilots reacting to something they've seen in midair. Now, coming over Washington, D.C. and the political mayhem that's going on down below, who knows what might be happening around Washington, D.C., but these pilots, their principal job is to get their passengers safely onto the ground.
Indeed. The sad thing about this is the jet aircraft was only about 200 feet from the runway, which means they're committed to the landing. They've decided they're going to land on the runway 33. Not a problem at all. And the Black Hawk presumably has not seen their lights or has misidentified the traffic they're supposed to go around because they turned into the path of the aircraft on final approach. And if the collision happened at 200 or 300 feet, it meant both aircraft were remarkably low. So it was a most unfortunate circumstances. When you accept visual flight rules, you have to be sure that you can separate yourself from obstacles on the ground and or other traffic items in the area. And a really busy place is an airport. You have to be very, very careful about crossing active runways, unfortunately.
Now, this business of visual flight rules, Kevin, I mean, in the middle of the night, it's dark. There are so many distracting lights around the city.
It's true, yes.
This is in the heart of the city, this Reagan National Airport. It was called National. It was then called Reagan. It's now called Reagan National. All around it, there's the Pentagon, there's, big offices, obviously government buildings and so on.
There's also anti-collision lights everywhere. There are cranes in the area being built, things being built like that. There's a freeway behind it. So the traffic, if you looked at the video, the traffic behind you would distract you. I couldn't tell which was the runway and which was the motorway, if you know what I mean. And I know what I'm looking at. So it's quite complex. If you're that low altitude, you really don't have an overview and you're moving. In the case of the Black Hawk, it's doing 120 knots cruising along. It might have been better if it did a couple of orbits or climbed or whatever, or was used radar vectoring, but they didn't take radar vectoring because it wasn't required at the time. Visual flight rules. If you say, I see the aircraft on final approach, the guys in the tower have to think that you are looking at the right aircraft. But time and time again, people have made the mistake of looking at the wrong aircraft or just not seeing the lights they're supposed to look at. And your brain takes up what it sees, if you know what I mean, and believes what it sees as well.
What about collision avoidance technology on board each of the two craft?
An excellent question. People have said to me, how come the TCAS, or the traffic collision avoidance system, did not work? Had there been two airliners involved, the pilots would have received instant signals saying either climb or descend, and the collision would probably have been avoided. They might have scraped the paint off each other from that point of view. But as far as I can tell, the US Army Black Hawk either is not equipped with the TCAS system or it wasn't switched on. And I'm not sure which it was. Probably it's not equipped with it because it's a device used by commercial and heavier aircraft. From that point of view, helicopters low level might not need it.
Now, they are talking about a rescue and recovery mission. The likelihood of anyone coming away from this alive is remote, I would think.
No, this is awfully similar to something we spoke about quite recently when the Air Florida crash took place in the Potomac in January 1982. The aircraft never fully took off and it crashed onto the ice of the river. We're in very similar circumstances now, with the exception of the fact that it's dark and it's very cold and windy. Unfortunately, the aircraft is broken into 3 or 4 pieces and the helicopter was cut in 2 basically and flashed onto the water. But the bodies will be washed down river, to be very, very crude about it, if the aircraft pieces have broken up, it's going to be an exceptionally difficult thing to recover all the bodies quickly and get the machinery in there to recover the 2 airframes, which will have to be looked at very closely by the NTSB, who will examine it straight away.
Now, already, Kevin, the conspiracy theorists are suggesting that, cutbacks by the Trump administration could have led to this. This is hardly so.
I know, and I've seen nonsense up on the internet, so to speak, saying, "Oh, look, this was a radio-controlled Black Hawk. It was designed to do this, this, and this, and there were VIPs on board," and all that kind of nonsense. This is stuff and nonsense from that point of view. It is, I think, and I'm preempting the investigation, it's just a mistake where somebody visually made a mistake and flew into the path of another aircraft, and this happens from time to time. This is the perfect circumstances for it from that point of view, in the dark, low level at night with reasonably high speed. But the idea that there's a conspiracy behind it is just a nonsense. It doesn't happen. I don't believe it for a moment.
Now, what will happen next? Because obviously you've got the air traffic control people at Reagan National. You've got American Airlines. You'll have a federal investigation, but you've also got the U.S., whether it's Army or Air Force. It was a military chopper. This interface is going to make things, I think, rather complicated in the investigation.
It is going to be complex, but already, which surprised me, I mean, on the internet, we have the video of the accident, we have the air traffic control tapes released, and I've also seen online just a few minutes ago the video of the radar. All this has been released before the wreckages are taken out of the water, so to speak. That's unusual, but you've got a whole host of people involved. The lead agency will be the NTSB. And ironically, its office is only downtown in Washington from what I remember. I'm sure I walked past it some years ago. They will be on scene, within a matter of minutes. And you have got various authorities trying to get the wreckage out. There's a whole host of things to be done then with recovery of bodies, because there's a whole, circumstances which must be put in place. And it's going to be awkward. A river is free flowing, and the river Potomac is no different. It's fairly deep, fairly dark. The conditions are very poor for that kind of, point of view. Families have to be taken down to the nearest airport, which I presume is going to be either, the airport itself or some other place. And there are circumstances, there's sheriff's departments, there's, federal and other authorities which have to organise it. And of course, the interface with the US Army, whose aircraft is also involved. It's quite complex, but the Americans have done it before. They're quite good at it. Once there's no interference from on high politically, so to speak.